Transport 517 had no damage that we could determine visually from our vantage point high above. There was ground breakage around it, suggesting it hadn't landed tightly, but it looked to be perfectly intact. We swept all comm levels and received nothing, so anybody who might still be in there were either unable or choosing not to respond to any hailing, even to personal, short-form devices. Our thermal scanning is more oriented to geological uses, so there was no way of determining if anyone was still in the transport, or discovering anything that might have happened inside, or had been recorded in the ship's running log, without physically going down there. I am not a stranger to unfriendly, even hostile, environments. Nobody living in this colony is, but some of us have been the first in many places, and so have experienced the difficult offerings of our moon at an even closer distance. It was no great rift, but the high shelves on the sheer face of the western hold in the Grand Valley were very challenging. It was in the days when the valley was growing feverishly, and the entire colony was locked into building and developing, and all of that was strongly affected by weather conditions that were unlike anything people living on our planet had to contend with. Weather monitoring became as important to our security as tracking the enemy is during a time of war. Forecasts and alerts were constantly updated and broadcast, and the majority of the equipment needed for long-range monitoring back in those times was installed at the top, western corner of the hold, at the northern mouth of the Grand Valley, where it would eventually spill and spread into what is now the Expanse. It was there that we first used the hard breath technology, which basically uses airspeed and or pressure to harden and hold its shape. Hard breath allows us to build relatively decent shelters without any hardware at all. Shaping it by catching the air in a certain way and holding it into form takes some practice, but the results can hold up for many spins, without adjusting, if it's done well. Sometimes, shifts in pressure will also cause it to need adjusting, but the amount of practical testing we put it through advanced the technology quickly. This was doubly beneficial, as it not only advanced to the point where we were maintaining a freestanding structure housing 12 people in a full mobile facility, without a single pinch of plaques, it also allowed us to perform important weather monitoring at a critical point in our colony's development from a vantage point that we would not have been able to manage with only our standard, planet-developed building practices. That's why we joke about the protective blanket over our colony being made of hard breath. Without it, we would not have been able to maintain the monitoring equipment that allowed us to grow faster than anticipated. A team from the other transport was setting up some hard breath shielding around 5/17's open door. Moon debris had already drifted into piles throughout 517, caking itself into everything and making closing the door manually more of a chore than it was worth. Until the lithium packs could be switched out, the doors would remain open, so they were forming hard breath walls to try to cut down the amount that was blowing in. They confirmed that the lithium packs were dead, and that there was no other indication of trouble. The door was open, but nothing seemed to be out of place so far as could be determined, with much of the cruiser's interior caked in dust. No written messages, which one might expect if they were leaving a powerless ship, with no other way of communicating where they were headed. And nothing taken away. The standard inventory was still completely in place, so if the Guardians who were operating this transport had left voluntarily, they did so without a single piece of survival gear, or a scrap of food or water. Not that any of that would help them in an environment that was hundreds of times hostile than the closed interior of a transport. Dark and powerless as it might have been, leaving it went against all Guardian training in any circumstances, much less the treachery of the Great Rift. There was nothing to prove it at the time, but the Guardians in Transport 517 neither landed their ship, nor left it, voluntarily.